practitioners in this field, whom I will say their names, but they will introduce themselves more fully, and it'll also give you a sense of the order of today's agenda. Josh Peterson, Manager of the Office of Violence Prevention of the City of Minneapolis. Cynthia Prosek, Executive Director of Restorative Justice Community Action, a contracted entity with the city, I might add. Willie Bridges, Senior Planning Analyst with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. And Mary Ellen Hang, Deputy City Attorney, City of Minneapolis. With that, I will turn it over to Josh, and we will proceed with the presentations in turn. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Councilmember Reich. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you all for joining tonight. I'm going to attempt to share my slides here real quick. And can someone confirm for me that my slides are showing there?
Yes, they are.
Perfect. Thank you. So thank you again, Councilmember Reich, for having me here tonight, and thank you all for being here, and for the other panelists who are going to be speaking tonight. I'm going to do my best to just share a little bit of brief information and then get out of the way, because certainly my fellow panelists are the main attraction this evening. But Councilmember Reich's office reached out around this topic, and I thought it might be helpful to present just a little bit of sort of grounding context around how violence prevention and restorative practices intersect. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but just real briefly again, my name is Josh Peterson, and I'm a manager with the City of Minneapolis Office of Violence Prevention, which is part of the city's health department. So real quickly, I just mentioned that the Office of Violence Prevention is housed within the health department of the city. So that's key, because when we think about violence prevention with the city, we talk about a public health approach, or public health approaches to violence prevention. And I want to spend just a second talking about sort of what that means, because I think it can mean a lot of different things. And so there's this sort of textbook definition of a public health approach to violence prevention, which is really this idea of defining the problem and identifying risk and protective factors associated with that problem, developing and testing prevention strategies, and then assuring widespread adoption of those strategies. And that's certainly a component of what we do, but I think that a public health approach to us is a little bit more nuanced and complex than that. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that means, and you can see some of it on the slides here. So the first thing is that when we think about violence, we think about something that's very complex, and it's much more than just sort of bad choices being made by bad people. Really, it's about sort of the complex interplay of social conditions and how those social conditions impact violence, and really thinking about not just the choices people are making, but the choices people are given based on the social conditions, the economic conditions, all of the other factors that sort of come into play in this complex mix of things. And so really, when we're thinking about violence prevention, we really need to think about all of the factors that might put someone at risk or protect someone from experiencing or perpetuating violence. And all of those things are, again, part of a sort of a complex web. And the other piece that's really key to us is this idea that violence has to happen both upstream and downstream along a continuum. So if we want to interrupt violence, we can't just do prevention on the front end. We can't just address it after it's already happened, but really we need to think about it sort of along this continuum. And so I say all that because I think that that is relevant to this idea of diversion. Because violence is complex and is heavily influenced by social conditions, we can't just incarcerate ourselves out of the issue of violence. That simply isn't going to address all of the complexity that really is a part of violence. And really, a reliance and over-reliance on incarceration alone not only sort of fails to address those complex social conditions, but often actually incarceration can exacerbate and perpetuate some of those inequitable social conditions. And so really thinking about diversion is important in the context of violence prevention, because diversion really can be a valuable tool for interrupting pipelines to incarceration. And really, so in that way, is sort of a meaningful part of building safe and healthy and thriving communities. And so I mentioned we think about violence prevention along a continuum. I think that that's key for this as well. So we think about violence sort of in terms of this idea of upfront or upstream solutions, and that's things that sort of are interwoven into the fabric of society and that can help prevent violence before it happens. We then think about sort of violence as what we call in the thick or early intervention, often at the first sign of risk. And then we think about it in terms of kind of aftermath or downstream. And so this is often after violence has occurred and sort of what we can do to deal with the lasting consequences and promote healing and restoration. And once again, I think that that is important in this context of diversion, and particularly in this context of restorative diversion and restorative practices and restorative justice, which is sort of the focus for tonight. And that's why I wanted to kind of set this stage from our perspective. So when we think about violence, we think about it as something that's cyclical. And so when we think about our violence prevention work, it's really about thinking about how we can support folks who have experienced violence in some way, how we can support them on a path away from either re-experiencing violence or perpetuating violence that they may have experienced. And I think that restorative practices can be a really key part of that, because restorative practices, a key component is this healing process for individuals and communities that you'll hear more about later. And so in order to sort of interrupt that cycle of violence, healing is a really key component. And in addition to that, I mentioned that diversion is key for sort of interrupting this pipeline of incarceration, but interrupting that pipeline of incarceration doesn't solve the whole problem. Really, we need to think about sort of what we can do to foster additional things in individuals and communities. And because of how restorative practices operate, and I imagine you'll hear more about this as well, they really are a powerful tool to foster things like accountability and responsibility and connectedness to community and empathy. And those are all factors that we see as being really, really critical in really promoting sort of safe, healthy, and thriving communities. And so that's just my very brief overview of sort of what we do and how it ties into this as a way to sort of set the stage around this idea of the importance of restorative practices around violence prevention. So I will leave it at that and hand it off to Cynthia, unless there are immediate questions right now.
It doesn't look like there are any hands raised or questions in the chat currently, so we can move on. Thank you, Josh.
All right.
You're welcome.
Let's see if I can get mine up. That's do you see my?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm Cynthia Prosek. I'm the Executive Director of Restorative Justice Community Action. We've been serving Minneapolis for over 20 years. It's getting close to 25 years now. And one of the things, as I've been involved with this organization almost from the beginning, I started as a volunteer. And then as we moved into becoming a nonprofit, I was on the board, and then I just could never kick the habit. So restorative work has really become part of my life. So with that, let me move on to the next. So like Josh was saying, there's a couple of things that are different. There's a huge paradigm shift from how we react around crime or criminal activity from our current traditional system, which is that it is based on a violation against the state. It's a sort of an abstract idea. So that something went wrong. This is what they have to do to repair it or to fix it. So in the criminal justice system, it's really about somebody made a violation of law. But from a restorative justice assumption and that shift of the paradigm is that crime is really an act against another person or the community, that an event is not an isolation. It's not like an isolated incident, because just like a pebble dropping in the water, that pebble may go down, but there's ripples that continue to occur. And that's how restorative justice sees this. And in the other, like if an offender is accountable to the state, so the offender is giving back to the state's acting on behalf of the community. But in a restorative world, the offender is accountable to the victim and the community. And sometimes the victim may be a store, but it's the community as a whole. How is the community affected by that incident? And then accountability in the traditional system equals suffering, and that suffering is usually through punishment, through shaming, through things that make somebody feel that they have to pay back in the same sort of suffering. Where in the restorative justice, accountability is really defined as taking responsibility and taking action to repair the harm. And then finally, victims are not primary participants in our traditional criminal justice system. If they have an ability to speak, it's usually at the end, or they may give a statement. but they're not part of the whole decision-making process, where the victim's perspective is essential to understand the harm and determine what might help repair the harm and how in a restorative manner. So the basic justice lenses that we're looking at, so the basic criminal justice lens is retributive, saying what law is broken, who did it, and what punishment do they deserve. Where in the restorative lens, we are saying who's been hurt, what are their needs, and what are their obligations, and whose are they? And it's really a group effort. This is not an individualized work. This is work in community. Things stay in community. As Josh said earlier, we cannot like arrest our way out of our problems. People come back to the community. The community needs to repair itself for people to feel whole and safe, because as we push people out from a legal perspective, but don't take care of really helping them understand how to address that harm, and how to then, as the community surrounds and supports them, how to help them make those changes so that they don't repeat it. We're going to keep repeating that same incident. So the basic 3 pillars of restorative justice is really, what are the harms and needs of what occurred? And those harms and needs may not just be based on a direct victim. It can also be based on what are the harms and needs of the person who committed the offense. Because a lot of times, people do things out of situations. Maybe they're forced into that situation, peer pressure, could be they have a habit. So they also have harms and needs. As well as how their actions in the community affected them. So we're talking not only about, let's say it's a drug offense. Somebody was caught with drugs, smoking in a park. And so it's not just about them breaking the law about smoking in the park, but they were caught there. There may be families around that park area. There may be other people affected by it, but it's also, how did that person get there? Why did they have that with them? So the questions about the when we're in that restorative mindset is, so what happened? What led you to this? How do you feel about what happened? How did you feel about the incident? And who do you think was affected by your behavior? So all those conversation pieces are about really eliciting a human picture of what occurred. And in that conversation, then we find out what obligations are needed, like what harms were addressed, or what harms and needs were identified. Then what are the obligations to repair those harms? And how are we going to help them be engaged in the community and stay positively engaged in the community through repairing that harm? So it's the harms and needs, but it's the obligations of who's obligated to do that. And then how are we engaging around that? How are we supporting that person? How are we helping them be accountable? And how are we helping that victim feel also supported through this time? So a brief history of just where, like I said, RJCA has been around for a little over 20 years. I've been there since the beginning. So some of this is just kind of from my perception. It's not like a detailed history. But in the early 90s, there was a lot of work around neighborhoods trying to stop that revolving wheel of people being cited in and out of the jails. So what are ways that we can really address behaviors in the community? So restorative justice was one of those models, and the neighborhoods really went behind that. Stevens Square, the downtown East and West, Elliott Park, and Loring Park joined together to start what is now Restorative Justice Community Action, RJCA, to address these offenses. And they worked primarily with only with adults at that time. There was also some in Powderhorn Park that started, and they really were working around soliciting and prostitution cases. And then there were other youth programs that were throughout the city that worked with the MPD and Hennepin County, which included BIHA, which is Black, Indian, Hispanic, and Asian Women in Action. Which unfortunately isn't around anymore. And then a few others that I'll mention later. And then in 2005, RJCA became a nonprofit. And then in 2008, during the financial crisis, what we really did was we helped pull together the restorative justice partners in a collaboration. And in a way, that's a very restorative process, that we are working together with one another, supporting each other's efforts so that we can give a fulsome restorative answer to cases and cover geography, cover cultural specificity. And so we help to do that by helping pooling funds through pooling funds and pooling efforts to help us work together as a collaborative. And we've continued that and we've expanded that. The basis of all restorative justice is that community is at the center. Community is essential for restorative work because it's all about relationships. So that means we have to invest in each other. And what does investing in each other look like? Collaboration is a very important way of doing that, making sure that we are working with others. If we are doing cases, we are making sure we are working with the person who committed the offense, we're working with any victims, or we're working with community. We're helping to bring resources together. We are working with them as they are helping to identify their needs and also the supports they need. We are working with them to move forward. So one of the questions that as a community, and we're thinking about restorative processes, not only in diversion, but as how do our neighborhoods pull this together? Are we expecting people, are we expecting to win people over to come to our side? Are we dominating the agenda? Are we making sure that we are listening and responding to a shared commitment? And then in cooperation, relationships are at the heart of a healthy communities and restorative practices. And restorative practices are based in indigenous practices. So it's where the community is at the heart. Are we taking time to know each other enough to care for one another? It takes a village. Are we engaged in knowing others and allowing others to know us? That is what the investment of restorative justice really is. And then also, are all voices being heard? Are we taking time to listen to the voices that have been speaking but not really heard? You know, what have we been missing and who do we need to bring to the center of the decision making? Restorative justice is making sure that those who are most affected by crime are at the center of the decision making. They are there making those decisions. So there are opportunities currently for learning more about restorative justice at RJCA. Please contact our program manager, Tina Siegel. You can observe our process. You can learn about our youth and adult programs and also training opportunities. There's community conversations that we've had around implicit bias and anti-racism. Our youth collaborative agencies and partners currently are the Conflict Resolution Center. They also have volunteer and community conversations going. The Legal Rights Center, they do work mostly in schools, but are a really strong partner and advocate. The Koinonia Leadership Academy is also it does training and does a lot of mentorship around our communities practitioners, especially our BIPOC practitioners who are independent contractors with RJCA. And then Seward-Longfellow Restorative Justice, which is in the Seward-Longfellow areas. They also do training and have some volunteer opportunities. And then another partner with us is the Minnesota Peace Building Leadership Institute. They do training around trauma, but they also do intro to restorative justice, and their next one is coming up on May 11th. That's just a touch point on all that stuff. And so I hope that is enough for a brief history.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was very, very well done. And I'm not seeing any immediate questions for your piece. So we can move into the next part. If there's a presentation, we can cue that up.
Yep, Willie's next.
Yep. And
Okay.
I don't know if he has material or not.
Yep. I'm here.
Is your camera off? There you
There.
are.
Hey.
There we are. Thank you, Councilman Rick, for inviting me and to talk about what we do. My name is Willie Bridges, and I am the Senior Planning Analyst in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office in the Juvenile Division. And what Cynthia and Josh was talking about, diversion and restorative justice, I will wrap all that together, how it works in our office. I've been with the county attorney since 1984. And one of the things that we had back then, we had diversion program. And excuse my voice, I have allergies. So my allergies are bothering me today. I apologize for that. Anyway, so we have our diversion program in the county attorney's office. And one of the things about our diversion program is that what we look at, we work with juveniles 10 to 18 years of age. And those juveniles that we have in our diversion program, those juveniles have committed minor crimes. That can be shoplifting, that can be low-level felony, that can be fighting in school, that can be shoplifting, minor things that we look at. And we ask ourselves the question with our diversion program, what is it that we can do for our youth in Hennepin County without charging them or for not having a record? And one of the things that we have is our diversion program. In our diversion programs in Hennepin County, we offer services, as Cynthia talks about the victim. So we refer kids to the restorative justice program, to restorative justice. And we also look at the victim. We try to get the victim to participate in those restorative justice to talk about what has gone on. But one of the things that's a little bit different for us, we have kids who are participating in restorative justice, but we also see that that youth needs other things. And one of the things that we try to do is assess through Headway what is it they need. So we may have our youth going through the restorative justice process, and at the other part, he or she may also go to counseling therapy if they need that. If that's the assessment, we try to offer those services. One of the things that's important for our office, the county attorney's office, is to address the kids' needs. What are their needs? Why are they acting out the way they're acting? Why are they breaking the law? What can we do? So restorative justice is a part of it. We also have other programs that we refer kids to. What we try to do, again, is to get at the behavior. We use the Girls Rap program. That's a gender-specific program through the YWCA. So Headway get those cases. They assess the case, what that youth need, and they can refer that particular girl to the Girls Rap program. That program is about 6 weeks. And the youth go to that program, talk about the behavior, how they're acting, and what they can do different. And the YWCA, YWCA, they work with the young girls, again, through 12 through 16. They have those girls in a girls group. They talk about the behavior, talk about what they can do different, and they also try to get at what is causing some of this behavior. So we have that program we utilize too. We also have Center for Multicultural Mediation. That is a program that we use for our Somalian community. The language is spoken there. The person who's in charge, Abdi Ali, is the person who's in charge of that program. They meet with the community people, talk about the behavior. What can this youth do to address his or her behavior in the Somalian community? That's an important part of the program to address the needs of the many diversity of people in our communities. And the Center for Multicultural Mediation is one of the programs. Again, they try to figure out what is causing behavior. What is it that they need? They also have a Somalian psychological services they can refer to kids to if they need that kind of help. If they need therapy, they can refer the kids to that program. Another program that we use is Black empowerment. We have cultural specific programs. This again is a psychological program, the counseling therapy, if our kids need those. One of the things about our diversion program that we do different, we meet with the parents and we engage the parents in what is it that your child needs? What is going on? Because we want the parents, it's so important to have the parents to be part of that. And when I say parents, I don't mean mom and dad. I mean mom, dad, grandmother. It can be the pastor at the church. It can be the neighbor. Who is that child's support system? How does he and she, who do they relate to? Who can support them? So we refer young people through the various programs. Hennepin County in 2020, give you a few numbers. In 2020, we had 1,099 cases that we had gotten for pre-charge diversion. Of those cases, we had 537 cases that we referred to diversion. Of those cases that were successful, there are 289 cases that has been successful, and there's about 200 that's still pending. To give you a perspective of what we've done in the last 5 years, of all the cases that we have diverted out of Hennepin County, 80% of the cases were successful of those kids who participated in the program and completed the program. One of the things that's unique about our diversion program, one of the things that we do not try to do is to create a record. Break it down. So we have a letter diversion. If a youth, say, goes out and steals $50, $25, we're not going to charge that case. We're going to say, send a letter to the parents, talk to your youth about that behavior, talk to them about that. We're not going to sit up and charge the case. The other cases, so a kid comes in, he or she shoplifts from the mall. That seems the thing that kids do a lot of. Okay, sometimes the malls participated in a restorative justice process, say for RJCAs. They sent to that program. You may have a representative from the store sitting down there talking with the youth, talking about the impact of what their behavior has caused at the store and how this hurts the community. That's important. Cynthia talked about that, the importance of having the victim involved. All the cases that we divert, those cases are chargeable. We will not divert any cases that aren't chargeable. We also have the part of diversion that's unique. Once a kid finishes the program, we will try to expunge those cases from the city and the state so there's no record. Because what we found out is the county can respond, expunge those cases, but there's still a record. So what we do is say, okay, we will get those records from the state and the city to say there's no record, so that kid, he or she can go on to get a job, to go to college, that there's no record. Once they've completed the program, they successfully completed the program, they've stayed out of trouble. On the petty cases, stay out of trouble for 6 months, don't get into trouble, we'll expunge those cases. The low-level felony cases, stay out of trouble for a year. Do not get into any kind of trouble, complete the program, and we will expunge the case. We'll get rid of the case. There's no record. You can go on with your life, to get a job, to go to college, do what you're going to do. That's an important part of our diversion program, because we do not want our kids to have that record that will prevent them from getting a job and affecting them going to college. So in our diversion program, we use restorative justice. We utilize other programs that's going to address the kids' needs. Also, part of our program, if there's restitution, we have a work program that the kids can work to pay off the restitution to the victim. And a lot of the kids have jobs. The older kids have a job, and they're expected to pay those restitution out. We have something new that we just started for our kids, and it's a book club. Instead of picking up trash, you have a judge who facilitates this discussion. The kids have the same books at their levels. Headway assess that, and we will send those kids to that particular group to read a book. All the kids get the book free. We get the books to the kids, and Headway knows they have an idea of what their reading level is, and that's a month program. If they complete the program, that's like community service for us. And so that's a new program that we're doing. We kids are not learning picking up trash. We all come to that conclusion. So we want to do something that they're learning from, and they go and read a book. They'll have the book, and they come back with a judge and a couple of the other public defenders and prosecutor are part of this discussion. You have a facilitator who's doing this group, and that's how that happened. Ryan?
Yeah, I have a question. When you said you have an 80% success rate, is that across both the 6-month and year-long program, or what specifically were you referring to there?
The 80% since we've been doing this 5 years, 80% of the kids, both from the 10 to 17 years of age, since we started in that past 5 years, they've been 80% successful with the program. They've completed the program. We've expunged their records, and they've been successful. They paid restitution. They've done everything that we asked them to do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I see Jim Benson also has a question. Jim, you can unmute yourself. Yes.
Okay. What's the recidivism rate at 10 years, at 5 years?
We have not collected that information. We're in the process of looking at that information, seeing how we collect and look at the recidivism. That's something we're looking at.
Well, you've had enough time. This program has been in place for a long time. It would seem to me that you would have numbers like that.
Well, at this time, we don't have numbers like that. We've just got funding to get a research person to collect that data, and that's what they're doing. It's collecting, going back, looking at the cases to see what the recidivism. That's something that's important to us, and that's something that we're trying to collect information on.
Well,
But the kids that we've had so far, the ones that are talking about successful over a year, we have not seen any recidivism on those kids.
Well, the reason I look at this with
Sure.
somewhat of a jaundiced eye, as a matter of fact, I knew somebody that was for years ago that I was in that law enforcement business for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
A guy named Don Hammergren, his name you might remember. You're old enough to remember him. He was the superintendent of the juvenile detention center in Hennepin County, and when the new JC was built, and I had many conversation with Don about some of these things, and we were not exactly in agreement, but I look at this as, before I'd like to see something like this expanded or even continue, I'd like to find some numbers on what it really means in the long term. 6 months a year is a short period of time in a criminal career. And what happens when these people are on this continuum? You might not catch them for a year, but then a year and a half, yes, then they're back again. And this is really important when you're dealing with violent criminals, like some of them that you see now, and even some video of the carjacking incidents, which are terrifying. For what do you do with them? I mean, there are some individuals who just cannot be rehabilitated, and how do you screen for that? Those are some of my questions.
Sure. No, it's a good question. It's a good question. I appreciate the question, Jim. In some of those felony cases, they're not divertible. We won't divert those kids that are felon over cases that you're talking about, because diversion is not going to work with them, with all those kids. Some of the kids, like say, for example, we get the kids riding in the car. We may divert that kid because he's riding in the car with his friend, but that kid who stole the car, driving the car, the felony, we're not going to divert that kid. And we're going to look at what, that's a different thing altogether. And the kids that we're diverting, it's like having headway to assess what the needs, psychological needs, but at this time, we're not diverting those serious assault. We won't divert those cases. Burglary, we're not going to look at burglary, diverting those cases we're not going to look at that. But if a kid is going into a garage and something minor, we may look at that and take that into consideration. So it's really looking at the case, looking at the crime, what he or she's done, and say, well, that doesn't meet our criteria for diversion.
I'm not real well prepared for this tonight, but
No.
One question, another question
Sure.
that I do have is how much consultation do you do with the arresting officers and with some of the patrol officers in the area where the kid lives, for instance, who probably knows the kid better than most anybody else on the face of the earth in a lot of cases? Do you do things like that?
That's a good question. Some of the things that happen in our office, the police officer will send their report and say they would like to have that kid diverted. So we get requests, and some of the police departments have their own diversion programs that we don't even see them. Like Cynthia, for example, she works a Minneapolis program, and that's a diversion program. So we may not even see that case because she's working with her. Cynthia, she's got her hand up. Cynthia?
Yeah. So that's true. So we meet with the MPD, and along with Josh and Willie, we have quarterly meetings. We talk about some of this stuff, but the police department is very keen on, they're pulling these cases and setting them aside to say, are these divertible or not? So they're taking time with them. But the other thing I want to say too, as far as reoffense, there's the basic criminal justice studies on youth crime is that 75% of kids grow out of criminal activity. Just in general, 75% of kids do that. So what we want to do is really focus on helping, youth who may need more. That's where you get to the root of the, that's where you talk about the root. Where is this behavior coming from? You have the family involved, you know, because they need long-term support. That family support is their long-term support. That's where you're giving them more support that will be carried on past that intervention time. So I hopefully I answered a little bit of that.
Well, what if there is no family to
You know,
speak?
But we have kids who have the community who support. There's the aunt, uncle, the grandparents that are involved with kids' life. And you're right, there's some kids who don't have family, but they do have an aunt. They have the foster parents who's got those kids, because we do not want to see our kids criminalized, because what happened is they have that record, they're not able to get a job, or they're not that record is there on certain cases. There's one other hand, Emily. I think that's Emily.
Yeah, Emily, go ahead. Emily Quast, Chris.
Emily, are you on the line still?
Can you hear me?
Oh, now I can.
Yep.
I've got a wonky microphone switch here. You know, I think you and I were both attended the Youth Justice Council meeting in January. And one of the things that I brought that came home with me was something that Emily Terrell said. She talked about siblings needing what the older one got, and they can't get the kind of service that the older child got without getting into trouble. How do siblings get addressed? Siblings' needs.
Some of the programs that we have, they work with the family. You know, so some of the programs really work with the family. Like I was talking about the Center for Multicultural Mediation, they work with the family. And same thing with Cynthia. If she sees the RJCA program, if they see the need other than the restorative justice, they'll try to find the resources in the community if the family needs whatever they need. And Headway is the clearinghouse. They will try to refer the family out into the community, because we know that our families and our kids need more than other program. There's a program that's fairly new to age 46. And one of the things he said, that the kid had got in trouble, and he asked the mom, "What do you need?" And she said, "I want to go to Stillwater to see my son." He arranged for her to go to Stillwater to see her son. And then she trusted him. And then, because the kid was the issue, then she worked with this person to deal with her family and to deal with the kid's needs. So a lot of our programmers are asking the family. They may do restorative justice. That's pretty much what all of them. They will ask the parents, "What else do you need? What do you need?" Because they know the resources out in the community. And that's an important question. Because sometimes it's just not the kid, because the kid has that family, that's a support system. And like someone once said to me, if a family needs a roof over their head or they need to eat, that is the most important thing for them to do in order to accomplish. And a lot of our restorative services program and our agencies, that's what we do. We ask families, what is that you need? I do not want to take up, I want to be able to ask more questions, but Mary, are you on the line up next?
Yeah, just a reminder to everyone, we'll do another Q&A here at the very end and after Mary Ellen's presentation until 7:30. So.
All right. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mary Ellen Hing. I am the Deputy City Attorney of the Criminal Division in the Minneapolis City Attorney's Office. I have been a prosecutor for Minneapolis for coming up on 24 years, and I have been the criminal deputy since 2012. So I'm going to just talk a little bit, like Willie did, about some of our diversion programs, one of which is restorative justice. So can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So as others have alluded to, diversion is an alternative process used by prosecutors where we offer kind of a different path for certain offenses. For my office, we prosecute misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor offenses for adults 18 and over in the city of Minneapolis. The felonies and the juveniles are handled by the county. And as a result of successfully completing one of our programs, the individual may have their case dismissed. They may have it resolved in a more favorable manner that's not dismissal. But that's generally what we're trying to do, is not only give them a more favorable outcome, but reduce their recidivism and, as Cynthia alluded to, restore some of the harm done to the community. We offer diversion just like the county as pre-court referrals or court referrals. So basically pre-charged or once the case is charged. And our typical diversion program ends up with a dismissal of all charges, but we do have some diversion programs where we do have them enter a plea of guilty and hold a conviction out there until completion. In our office, we have a position in our office called Diversion Coordinator, and this is paralegal by skill. And our paralegal is responsible for screening all of the cases that we see for eligibility for one of our many programs. And we screen citations before they come to court, and we screen cases that are scheduled for court. And just like the county attorney, like Willie said, the first screen is done by an attorney to make sure that the case is something we want to pursue. If we feel the case should be dismissed, it gets dismissed, and we do not do a diversion referral. And then regardless of whether they go pre-charge or through the court system, our diversion coordinator will monitor their compliance with that program, and then she also tracks our statistics. And we've had this position in our office now for several years. So we offer a variety of diversion programs, and I'm just going to touch on all of them. The Restorative Justice, which is our program that we use Cynthia and her group for. We have a Shoplifting Diversion. We have a program called Interact, which is for obstruct legal process. Our Pathways program is our gun diversion program, and our brand new program, Renew, is a domestic violence diversion program we just started in January of 2021. Aside from having to be offense specific, we do have other excluding factors when we determine if someone's eligible for these programs. The two biggest excluders are if they have a large assaultive history or they have a recent felony or violent felony history. They're not going to be appropriate for any of these programs. So the first program is the one that we partner with Cynthia's group. We call it RJCA Restorative Justice, and this focuses on low-level misdemeanor livability offenses. So possessing drug paraphernalia, loitering with intent, public urination, loud music, at the U of M, minor consumption, minor possession, things like that. And we will offer an individual a chance to go through Cynthia's program and, excuse me, they'll complete a case intake. They'll do a facilitated community conference with a group of community members, and then they work together to formulate a restitution agreement, which can be anything from traditional community service hours. I think sometimes they do projects within the community using their specific skill sets if they are artistic or things like that. We leave that completely within the purview of the group to decide what's the appropriate restitution agreement. It might include a letter of apology, anything like that. Our shoplifting diversion program, we partner with a group called Diversion Solutions, and we send 3 types of offenses to that program. Shoplifting, people who also fail to pay their cab fare, their Uber or Lyft driver, and then what we call the dine and dash, people that go in, order food, and don't pay their tabs. They complete a 3-hour class, and it doesn't just focus on theft-related offenses. It talks about life skills, some financial responsibility as an individual. It's a very broad spectrum of this class. They usually complete some community service hours, and then they would pay restitution to the victim, to the cab driver, to the restaurant, if that was appropriate. Our Interact program is a very unique program. Again, we partner with Cynthia's group, Restorative Justice. This is a program we developed to help us better resolve our misdemeanor obstructing legal process cases. And these are individuals that are charged with somehow interfering with a police officer while they are performing their duties, but this interference is done without any force. So there's no, fighting, kicking, anything like that. We partner with Minneapolis Police Department, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, and Metro Transit participate. So if someone is charged with obstructing, say, a Minneapolis police officer or a sheriff's deputy, they meet. Cynthia's group facilitates the discussion, and we have a representative from that law enforcement agency sit down and have a discussion with the individual charged. We do not have them meet with the individual officer. That was frankly just very hard to arrange. And we felt having someone who was higher up in the law enforcement department, they will take that any feedback back to that officer directly, but they can better speak to policies and practices and kind of give a more broader law enforcement perspective. But both the individual charged and the officer get to talk about the incident from their perspective. Why the individual can say, well, this is why I did what I did. And the officer can share, well, when you did this, here's what the officer may have been thinking and why the officer may have reacted this way. And they have this very nice facilitated back and forth. And our goal is that we hope that the individual understands a little bit more about the police procedures, why the officer was doing what he or she was doing. And we hope that law enforcement takes away feedback about how the officer conducted him or herself, and also try to get law enforcement to understand the impact that these types of interactions have on the individual and the community. And we've asked participants in this program to complete a survey for us, and the majority of them do. And the feedback after going through this process is highly positive. A lot of them feel good about finally just being heard and having someone from law enforcement listen to them about why they did what they did or why they didn't understand why law enforcement reacted this way. So we were really pleased to see the positive feedback from the participant that they felt this was a positive process and they were glad that they went through it. Our Pathways program is not your traditional diversion program, but this is a program we developed in 2017 for the individuals that we charge with carrying a weapon, usually without a permit, or carrying a rifle or a BB gun in public. And it's a really unique program. We partner with Urban Ventures, and what we discovered is the majority of the individuals that we charge with carrying a weapon, an unlicensed weapon, they were young men, usually between 18 and 30, African American. And we looked at our data, and what we found is before we started this program, after we would convict them for their offense, these young men were going on to commit much more serious offenses. Over 70% of them went on to pick up a felony, sometimes a violent felony, ending up doing serious jail time or prison. And we realized we needed to do something to intervene and try to change that trajectory. So we developed this program in partnership with Urban Ventures. And it is basically 2 phases. The first phase is 12 weeks where they complete a bunch of programming, and it focuses on anger management, cognitive skills. And then the key piece that I think is making this successful is there is a piece of the programming that focuses on trauma. What we found was a lot of these individuals were carrying these weapons for protection. And this was because they had experienced some violence in their life. And this trauma piece of helping them kind of process that and work through this has really just had tremendous results. And then they spend the second phase, 3 to 6 months, more lessening the contact, trying to get them to go out and feel comfortable kind of going back out into the community and being productive, law-abiding citizens. To date, we've screened 192 people as eligible for our program. We've had 48 successful graduates, and some of those graduated in early 2019. So we've had, over a year to look at them, and only 9 of our 48 graduates have picked up any sort of new criminal offense. So 9 out of 48. So we have really drastically reduced the recidivism among this population with this program. So we're really, really excited about it. And it's really just a unique form of diversion that we do. And then our Renew program is a brand new program. We just started it in January of 2021, and we're partnering with North Point. And it is for basically first-time domestic violence offenders. And it's based a lot off of our Pathways program. We feel like we need to try to do better to give a more holistic family approach to domestic violence. And so again, they do an intake, identify what the issues are. They work with a case manager, and it's brand new. We're hoping to see the same type of success by taking this kind of holistic family approach for domestic violence. But we feel confident that we are going to have some positive results when we kind of evaluate the program as the year goes on. So for our office, diversion kind of has two paths. The restorative justice, the interact, the shoplifting are really meant for people that have very little criminal history, for whatever reason have committed an offense. They're not really likely to commit another offense. They're not chronic offenders, career criminals. They've made a mistake, and it's a way to kind of hold them accountable without creating a criminal history, but also having something substantive for them to do to hopefully learn from this process. And then our pathways in our renew are focused more on really trying to reduce the recidivism that we know these individuals often go on to have based on the types of offenses that we're focusing on. So Wes Clark is our diversion coordinator, and there's my contact information. Happy to share that, and anyone can reach out to me. But that's just kind of a really quick overview of our processes and our programs that we have in the city attorney's office.
Well, thank you for that. Any questions per that section of the conversation tonight? You see anything in chat, Ryan? I'm scrolling down.
I don't. Nope.
Hands raised?
Nope. No hands raised.
Well, in conjunction with the individual presentations, I think something that I've gleaned from this conversation is just the interaction between different jurisdictions, between public and outside partners, and how that interaction I think is quite valuable. I don't think these things could be accomplished very well in isolation. And so it seems like there's this emerging convergence of utilizing this model to effective ends from different perspectives, be it jurisdictional or programmatic. And I think that's something that perhaps could even be expanded upon if we thought about it. Who else could be at the table? Who else could value this approach? And what sort of programmatic place could this sort of model, even if it's done in a not a complete way, but even a partial way with some of its key insights, how could that be embedded in? It's something that I think I want to mine, so to speak, as we have conversations moving forward. So this interactive conversation has really got me thinking in a way that might go beyond what we're already currently doing. And Mr. Bridges, I think that data that you're collecting with that longer view, that research exercise, I think that will be very valuable for the not only the internal conversation that you have for cost benefit and effectiveness, the things that people like yourself do to be successful, but I think that's also going to be good conversational information for the public, because we are immersed in these conversations, and oftentimes there's these broad themes and maybe some assumptions that get baked into the themes. It'd be really great to have some data to be infused in that conversation too. So I look forward to that work, and I'm glad you initiated it.
And council member, if I may, when that question got asked, I went and I opened up my stats, and as I said, we've only had 9 graduates of our gun diversion reoffend, which is fantastic. But for our RJCA graduates, we did a study, looked at our graduates that participated in 2016 through 2018. 83 of them had no new offenses in late 2019. And for our shoplifting diversion program, we looked at our participants from 2014 to 2017, and we had 76% of those had no new offenses almost a year later. And so, we're seeing really good results from those programs as well as far as recidivism reduction.
I think one of the things too, excuse me, that we found out, like once the youth enters into the program, they complete the program. Once they bought into it and the families bought into it, they complete those programs. And like when we're starting collecting this data, as you were asking earlier, for the we're looking at some of this stuff over the last 5 years, that over 80% of people who entered the program, they completed the program. They were successful. So we're starting to collect the data. And as Jim was asking earlier about recidivism, we're looking at the recidivism, and we're finding out that there are other needs that these families and kids have. So we're trying to expand, out in the community, other services. I think one of the things that when we started out, we didn't have counseling therapy. And like now we have those programs. We definitely look at the gender specific, like the YWCA, that's a gender specific program for girls. And we look at the Somalian community. So it's like, look at the community, what is it that the community needs? It's like getting feedback from the community. What is it that you want? You know, so that's one of the questions that we've asked the larger picture in the county. What is it that the community needs? And one of the things that we had found out, the communities do not want the kids to have a record. They want the kids to be accountable for their behavior, but they do not want the kids to have a record because they've learned that once you go to college or get their act together and not committing crimes, having that record stops that. So some of the things that we're learning with our whole diversion program, as Mary Ellen was talking about earlier, so that these folks do not have records so they can go and be productive citizens.
And if I could, Councilmember, I appreciate that observation about the data. I think it's a great reminder because often we are so focused on doing the work that we don't necessarily do a great job of talking about the work and sharing the story of the work. And I think it's really important that we're doing that. And I do just want to take this opportunity to share a little bit of information about the Minneapolis Police Department's juvenile diversion program. So there is a sort of a collaborative that has been working around kind of guiding some of that work for the last few years. And through that collaborative, there was some work done with the University of Minnesota to do some research around some outcomes related to recidivism with MPD's juvenile diversion program. And the sort of the outcome of that I've seen is that they looked at young people who were had misdemeanor offenses, misdemeanor arrests between September of 2014 and December of 2018. And the young people who went through restorative justice diversion were 2.5 times less likely to be arrested again in the next year than those who went through traditional law enforcement processing. So some pretty, I think, compelling results there in terms of the value for potential future arrest for restorative justice diversion. And they also did some work around a cost-benefit analysis of that. And according to that research, they found up to $1.6 million in societal benefits for the RJ diversion for those young people. So again, I think some pretty compelling numbers there.
Very good. Well, thank you for that, Josh. Good information. And of course, that's a big part of what we're trying to accomplish here is actually effective intervention and results. And so data like that says we actually are getting results. Also, I'd say this is kind of a broad brushstroke observation. And when I first heard about this sort of approach, many years ago when I was a younger person, what I found was very compelling, and it's relevant today. So much of the dialogue around public safety can get very divisive quickly. And sometimes it gets in a realm of one space being more important than another. And what I mean by that is, collective responsibility and individual accountability. Here we have a program that very much says those things are intertwined, like right out of the gate. That's the first premise. And to me, that right out of the gate breaks down what I think is sometimes a more divisive approach to these conversations. And brings it together and says, no. It's not either or. It really very much is something that's intertwined. There is collective responsibility and there is individual accountability. And to be quite honest, we can maybe more effectively get to those two intersections by acknowledging that. So, and I think the very specific things you talked to all kind of reinforce that, I think, that broader insight.
If you don't mind, thank you for inviting me also, Reich. I appreciate it a lot. I just wanted to get to the question that Ginny has in the chat, if that's okay.
Of course.
She says, what kind of cultural sensitivity training do those who work in the diversion programs have? And so I would say that there's cultural sensitivity, but there's also, like Willie was saying, we do have culturally specific programs out there, culturally specific restorative justice partners and partnerships. So it's really being sensitive overall because we are treating people as individual humans who come from a unique place. So it's important that we are, it's more than sensitive, it's that we acknowledge where people are coming from and we try to make sure that we are matching them with people who represent who they are, so that there's less that needs to be explained. I mean, it's very interesting how I'm doing some work in with paired circle keepers. I'm matched with a African-American young man, and having him be part of that circle keeping with this youth who's African-American, it's like there's some things that he can say that doesn't even need to be explained, or there are things that, that he understands that doesn't need to be explained, where if he's working with just me alone, I would need more explanation. So there's a sense of also, we're not only sensitive, but we're making sure that we're bringing the right people to the right place, because that's very important, that we are making sure people who are most affected by this are also those who are at the center of that decision-making process.
I want to piggyback on what Cynthia is saying. That's an important part for our diversion program and the restorative justice program, that people with our kids especially, that there are people who are working with our kids that look like them. That's one of the things we have learned over the many years that I've been around, is that it's beneficial to the community, like the restorative justice program, like Cynthia's program, for example. They are out in the community where the people live. Cynthia lives over in the community. She knows the community, and she's been there for a while. So she knows what her community is all about. And with restorative justice programs and our diversion program, it is so important that those providers are in the community where people are living and people can relate to them. And that's an extremely important part, especially with the diversity. Especially with our young kids. We hear that all the time early on. Kids would say, they don't understand me. That white person doesn't get me. They don't know me. And that's so important that we provide qualified people that are working with our kids and our family in their community, not having them coming to us, but that we go to them. Oftentimes what we do with these programs, we want people to come to us, but that has to change. We have to go out in the community and work with our community and ask the community the question, what is it that you need, rather than telling the community what they need.
All right, we got a couple more questions, it looks like. So Dan Miller says, hi, Willie, welcome to Northeast. And then Pat Avery asks, what are some of the top offenses committed by juveniles?
And then Jim has his hand up after that.
Yep.
Could you repeat that, Ryan? What was it?
What are some of the top offenses committed by juveniles?
Shoplifting, shoplifting, shoplifting. It's like, it really is shoplifting. And so we see a lot of that, the shoplifting with the kids at the Mall of America. They go there and Walgreens, no, Target, Kohl's. Too bad I know them by heart. Target, Kohl's. And it's a store that kids go to all the time, but it's a shoplifting. That's the biggest thing that we see with a lot of our kids. And when school, which is interesting, when kids were in school, the assault fighting was there. Now the kids have been out of school for a year. That has not happened. But the biggest thing that we see with our kids, it is the shoplifting.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Benson?
You're on mute, Jim.
Sorry, Kevin, we haven't talked in a while. You know me as a skeptic, and a couple things stand out originally when you were talking about the participants in these programs, and one of them was the Legal Rights Center. And my experience with them, or my knowledge of them in the past, is, admittedly, it's not real recent, but has been pretty negative. The question is, what does supposedly an advocate whose job is to, for lack of a better term, get the kid off, have in this system? These are advocates, but they're different kinds of advocates, and I'm not so sure that they really belong in something like you're talking about.
Mary Ellen?
Thank you. Mr. Benson, I can't speak about the county, and I don't know if Willie will agree or disagree, but when we have built our programs, and especially our Pathways program and the new Renew, we actually engaged our public defender's office and our other defense partners, because these programs won't work if the participants won't do them. And so we needed to have their voice at the table to set this up in a manner that they understood. We're not trying to just trick the client into putting a plea of guilty in to give them a program they're going to fail at so we can just get that quick hook and convict them. And, the Legal Rights Center, our public defender's office. They've been very willing to engage us. And I think it's a different paradigm to actually bring them to the table and have their voice heard. And they are distrustful and they are skeptical, but as their clients start doing the programs and they see that these programs are really to benefit their clients as well as the communities that I represent as a prosecutor, and they see the clients can be successful, then we get the buy-in, and then they really encourage their clients to do the programs and they don't just dismiss it. And so, you know, I think we're trying to set up a different relationship with our defense partners, and really we are trying to be collaborative. And I think it's a new way of kind of doing all this work, but it's necessary to engage them, because if they don't buy in, we can set up the programs all we want. They will never send their clients, and then we'll never know, do they work or do they not? Do they have an impact not only on the individual participant, but on the communities? So I know that, yes, there's a lot of skepticism that they should they be at the table, but I personally think, yes, they're a key voice. We have to include them, and it's why at least our programs have been successful, because we have brought them to the table to help us design the program in the right way.
Cynthia, do you have a comment?
Yeah, and let me add to that. I mean, they've been a great advocate in helping getting the recidivism data. I mean, they're behind really helping us find out the research, you know, really focusing on racial disparities, really pushing everyone. And they're a great collaborative partner. They are not necessarily doing a lot of the work, but they are helping advocate for those of us who are doing the work. They're helping to create that pathway for that work to be done, and to be done well, and to be replicated in different places. So I think they're essential in really making sure it's quality, making sure that we have data, and making sure that that we are able to answer the questions that people are asking. So I think, yeah, they're super essential as far, and a great partner.
Willie, you have something to add as well?
Yeah, and I agree with Mary Ellen. It's important that, you know, we're partners. And if the public defender did not convince the kids to participate in the diversion program, they wouldn't do it. That's because I've seen that happen in some of the other cases, that we want the kids to participate in the program. We want the kids to get the therapy, go to counseling. In the higher level, that's not the case. But on the things that we divert, you know, they will talk to their client and tell their client this is a better alternative, so that you don't have the record, so that you do participate, that you get the help that you need. So I really agree with Mary Ellen. That's an important partner. You know, and the adversary part on the felonies, the other cases, that's a whole different story altogether.
Yeah, I would only say that, you know, I'm a little surprised because you actually do have the hammer in this particular case. The options, I would think, would look pretty good if you sat them down and say, option one is that you go to trial, or number two, you come with us and cooperate. You know, that's my humble opinion. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, though, with that, sometimes the individual defendants don't see beyond just the first case. And so for some of these individuals, you know, especially the cases that I'm handling, they're not going to do major jail time. And so they're like, fine, I'll get a conviction. They don't think about what that does down the road to them. And I think for me as a prosecutor, sure, I could convict them in that. But when I started looking at, okay, after we convict them, what's happening? They're still out there victimizing our communities. I'm not doing anything for public safety to just churn and burn and convict people. And so we've developed these programs because what we're really trying to do is give them something to hold them accountable, but also really stop the behavior, because that's what really makes our community safe. And if by just convicting and doing some jail time or whatever, they're out. And then, like I said, in our gun program, 70+% of them are going on to commit felony offenses. That is not doing anybody any good. And with our program now, they're staying productive, law-abiding citizens, members of the community. It's just a much better result. And then it frees me up and my staff up to really focus on those very serious crimes that are public safety risks, like DWIs, the repeat domestic violence offender, you know, the violent crimes that we do prosecute. And that's where I'd rather put my resources than some of these individuals who, you know, we're just trying to basically make them productive members of our communities.
And I think one of the things that for me, it's like addressing our kids' needs. With us, it's our kids. What is it that our kids need? A lot of our families don't have access to counseling therapy. And that's one of the things that we can provide those services to the families, that it's at no cost to them. We do a drug testing when the kid comes in. Okay, how are we going to address the issues? That the families don't have the money to provide those services. With our diversion programs, we're not charging these families, but we are asking them to, you've got to participate. If you don't follow through, there are consequences. And we, as you were saying earlier, Jim, it's explaining the consequences.
Mhm.
You will have that on your record, and that does affect, it doesn't go away. Our kids used to think, oh, this is nothing. I'm a juvenile. It's going to go away. But that's not the case, as we all know. Because the state keeps certain records. Those records are there. Those kids get older and they think it's gone. It's like restitution. You don't pay restitution. Okay, fine. You think it's going to go away? Well, that victim, he or she's going to file a civil judgment against you. You want to buy a car, you want to buy a house, you got to pay what you owe. It's not going to go away. So it's really explaining that to the families and to the kids. And I would say 95% of the kids, they get it. Sometimes you get the parents who don't get it, and that drives me crazy, because the parents want to think something else, and the kids, wait a minute, I want to do this program. And you find the kids are convincing the parents to do the program. So it's different. So.
All right. Well, I don't see any hands raised, any other comments in the chat. So I suppose you can take us out, council member.
Sure. Just one more call for questions or comment.
Yeah.
But if there, Jim?
One question is, how do you interface with the school system? And that's another one of my skeptical that I'm skeptical about, is that in my day, the school system was very cooperative with the criminal justice system. From what I've seen in recent years, depending on the school, but particularly inner city schools, they aren't so cooperative. As a matter of fact, they're trying to get rid of, or have already gotten rid of, the liaison officers in the school systems. But when you mention the fact that, yes, you tell them, here's what the consequences are down the road, this year, 10 years, 20 years, where do you want to be living 20 years from now? And that's something that families at one time in my day did all the time, and you probably have to substitute something else for that now. The school system certainly did that in my day, but I don't see that happening so much now, although I'm not independently involved with them, obviously. But I don't see that as a part of it. I know some teachers, and I've had contact with quite a few of them in the past few years, and I don't see that their attitude is in that direction. And I just, there's my comment.
One of the things that happens with the schools, one of the things that I do a peer jury at one of the high schools, a couple of the high schools, and they have a diversion program in there. They also, some of the schools have a restorative justice program. Like Cynthia's program will go out and train the schools, to do restorative justice. So they'll do that inside of the schools. So the schools are doing something, because we're participating with these schools in training the teachers, or the social workers, I should say, how to do restorative justice, how to do a peer jury. So that's something that the schools are open to, coming in there, to work with them on the peer jury. For example, the one that I'm on, it's like the kids, they're the jurors, and they listen to sometimes the fighting, this in the cafeteria, acting off or doing something. And what I find interesting, the students are harder than me on the kids in some of these schools, So the schools are doing something. They're taking a different approach of addressing some of the behaviors. What can they do? And also what I find in this process, when we were doing this, we had a judge go out there to talk about the whole process, talk about the confidentiality. We've had other lawyers go out there and do the training with the kids. And what we found out, you're talking about recidivism, what we found out, the kids who we trained did not go back in the schools to discuss what was going on with the kids who was before the juror. In the last 4 or 5 years we've been at one of the schools, they have not gone outside that circle. They have respected the privacy of the other kids that was there. So that was an interesting thing that the school has learned. And some of the schools want to do peer jury. So they're changing how they do it,
sounds like that could be expanded
Yeah.
productively. Any other final questions? If not, we are coming close to our end. Well, I do very much appreciate everyone who participated. I know sometimes there's people who have conversations with their neighbors, friends, maybe involved in a neighborhood group. So I've always invited people to extend the conversation, and we can always peel back if there's interest as we network out the dialogue. To the presenters, thank you ever so much for taking time this evening to present, to interact, to share, and it was very meaningful to me, and I hope it was meaningful to the participants from the community. And this is something where I don't try to have the end of a conversation by introducing a forum. I try to keep a conversation going, and sometimes it's literally that, a conversation, but also I do want this to be part of an ongoing dialogue between public representation, and then the people who basically institute the objectives of the public, and that's of course my presenters. So thank you for that, that being part of that continuum. Any closing comments from any, be it participant, presenters? If not, I thank you ever so much. I've been enriched by this dialogue, and I hope everyone can have a nice, beautiful spring evening.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you, Councilmember Reich. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Take care.